This will be a long intro, and if you're not interested in all the cool stuff and you're only interested in learning, you can use the timestamps down below to skip all of this. So those shots are pretty janky. They could use a bit more time, polish and all that, but they were each created in one afternoon, so cut me some slack. Today we're going to be texturing large landscape assets in Blender, but the workflow is quite common, so you could follow along with 3ds Max or whatever and just see what I'm doing and apply it to your own software. Note that texturing landscapes isn't the only key to a realistic mountain or realistic terrain. You also need a good height map or good terrain. That's why I took a few weeks to create a bunch of nice terrains that actually avoid looking like the common CG mountain. You know, the one with like the way too much erosion that rounds off the top and then has these thick flow lines running down. I'm trying to avoid that with my mountains, which have nice, sharp, large rocky outcrops and then more softer soil at the bottom. I'm actually going to give you guys one of these mountain assets for free down below so you can follow along with the tutorial. You get all the masks and textures with it. Oh, I see most of you guys are already scrolling down. The rest of the height maps, terrains, masks, whatever are all in 2 packs. We got the Lite Classic Mountain Pack and the Full Classic Mountain Pack. In these packs, you'll find mountains and mountain ranges. You have 4K for the Lite pack, and you even have 8K mountains in the full pack. You can go to the Gumroad pages and check them out. Here's a discount code for the first 5 people, a 25% off if you want to buy one of these packs. The patrons, the Sky Scholar patrons, I should say, already get the Lite Mountain Pack just on Patreon, and then the Earth Scholar patrons and the Sky Scholar patrons both get a 25% off discount code in case they want to buy the full pack. I'm also making sure that when you've bought the Lite pack and you want to upgrade to the full pack, you will have like a discount or something so you don't end up paying double. These packs come with height maps. They also come with optimized OBJ models with adaptive subdiv, basically, where the details retained in the very detail-rich areas and then the soil areas are way less vertices are used there. There's also a bunch of texture masks, which will be used in this tutorial as well to mask out certain areas and then use the right PBR materials. Then there's also a blend file, which already has the whole material set up for you. So all you have to do is add your textures. And basically at that point, you can just change whatever to your own liking. Now you can also just buy Gaea and World Creator 3, learn those softwares, create your own height maps and all that kind of stuff and use them in your own shots. The thing is, some people told me that they weren't interested in learning new software just yet, or people just don't want to diversify just yet because they're still learning Blender, or they just want to have quick and instant results. And for those people, my pack will be perfect because it's fairly cheap. It's instant. You have materials already set up for you. So pretty much all you have to do is import it, add your textures, and basically you're done. I recommend playing around with it a bit more, but that's the gist of it. Lastly, we're going to be using the freebie down below to texture. And I want you guys to render out your mountains with nice textures and nice lighting. Send me those renders, and whoever has the nicest render, I'm just going to send you the Lite Mountain Pack. So you get all the 4K terrains, and yeah, you can enjoy that. Oh, and another note, if anybody can go to my Patreon, not the patrons, but anybody can go to my Patreon and check what the names of the tiers are and see or know which series inspired those tier names, you will get a 50% discount on whatever pack you want to buy. Lastly, there is a add-on called Geoscatter, which is at the core of all of my work. And if you're still looking to pick it up to create your own big environments, I actually have an affiliate link now down below. That way, if you buy the add-on, you'll actually be supporting my channel a little bit, and I can keep making tutorials and, eat food. And yeah, now we can get started with the tutorial. Sorry for the long intro, but there was a lot to say. Thank you for sticking with me. Hey everybody, so welcome to the computer. We're gonna be texturing this exact mountain asset. So if you guys have all downloaded the freebie, you guys will have a nice little file with all the maps in there. So you guys should be seeing something like this. Basically, you get two OBJs, which are basically just optimized meshes. Then you get a height map. You have rock detail, rock map, snow map, a texture map. This is not the actual texture, but this will just has a lot of detail in it. As you can see, just packed with details. You have a tree map for if you have geoscatter, you can use it to mask out certain trees. You get a map with all the sediment flows or sediment layers basically combined to save you trouble. You get a details normal map. Gaea mountains are often pretty high res already. I never really felt the need to add a real normal map on them. It just looked weird and glitchy. So the details normal map actually adds something to the terrain. So yeah, got that for you guys. Got the final color map, which will be used to actually get rid of some tiling and textures. And yeah, that's basically what you'll see. Yeah, let's get started by looking at the actual mountain that I textured and get ready for you guys. So this height map's really fun because it has different angles that all look very differently. So this is actually a very steep part of the mountain, but if you look at the background, these two height maps are actually the exact same asset. So you can see there's some diversity when it comes to from which side you actually look at the mountain. As you've noticed, like the masks, I'll quickly go into Gaea to explain how I export these masks. So in case you are using Gaea, a world creator yourself, you can just mimic something like this. But yeah, you can see that, for example, not everything is being made using these masks. A lot of the snow details actually all within Blender. So we're gonna cover that. You're gonna see how we're really gonna get nice rock detail. That's all done in Blender because of course the height maps, one big downside on a height map is that you can't get a lot of detail on the vertical parts of your mesh. So we have to add that in using texture. So yeah, let's just get started. Before we start, of course, you need textures. I use Quixel, but in case you don't have it, yeah, there's a lot of free resources online as well. I'm actually sharing with you guys a doc down in the description that has a lot of the really nice free textures that I found, such as this textures.com one, which really has beautiful layered rock, and it's 4K for free. I use it sometimes myself. I definitely recommend using this asset. Yeah, it's just a really nice layered rock, which is a type of rock I use a lot because when we look at the reference, I'm gonna keep going, the reference on which this mountain is kind of being made in Gaea and stuff, you see a lot of this layering, especially in the more vertical parts where, yeah, the mountain's very vertical. You see these square, yeah, sort of square, not totally square, of course, but these like blocky layered rock, yeah, rocks. You can see it really nice, so like a layer of rock. I'm not a geologist or a soil expert or whatever, so I wouldn't know why that is, but it's just a feature I see a lot in these vertical areas, and hence I recreate that in my height map and in the texture. What you can also see is in the less steep parts, you'll actually see fractal terracing happening right here, which you also have in my actual, oh, this is a different one. In my height map, I think on the other side it's more obvious. You can see it here in the background mountain. There's some fractal terracing going on in the rocky parts that are a little less steep. The really steep areas, I made sure there was no fractal terracing. I just wanted to be sharp rock features. But yeah, in the areas that are a little less steep, you'll have fractal terracing going on. So yeah, there's a lot of stuff we're gonna be covering. I'm gonna go open Gaea now and quickly explain to you guys how I exported those masks that I have in my pack, in case you don't feel like buying the pack and you already have Gaea. So for the details normal, all you need is to add a details node and then just plug that into a normal map. That's basically it, very easy. I know my node group looks like an absolute mess here. Then for the texture, well, I did a thing. I combined a bunch of different things. So for the texture map, normally you could just plug in a texture node and get something pretty nice looking. I kind of went above and beyond and mixed in a bunch of Perlin noises and cell fracturing and soil. But normally a texture map like this would suffice for most things. Of course, for the rock, I use slope at a max angle of 50. I combined that with height to have my peak of the mountain completely turn into rock, because I didn't want like grass to grow on like the little flat peak. To get all the sediment flows combined, I combined a normal flow map. I combined that together with a soil, which again, soil is pretty heavy. Then you have velocity. This one is, I think, also more of sediment, like large, yeah, there you go, like large movement over the terrain. I combined this all with a height to make sure that it's not all the way in the valley. I don't want it to go all the way down. I want it to mostly be noticeable around the rocky faces, and then once the grass comes into play, to kind of disappear into the grass. This is all based on, of course, the reference I'm using, where you didn't see like very obvious flow lines. So again, here's a texture map, and when we combine this all together, we start kind of adding all these lines together and then breaking them up again with the texture and the height. And there you go, see? So basically I added them all together, just add. So all the white, you know, gets added together in one mask. And then I use height and texture to multiply, as you can see in these two, multiply and then take away, cut out of it again. And you can see the difference here. So this is all the sediment layers combined. It's very intense, it's a lot. And then if you just start using height and texture to multiply, so take out certain parts again, then yeah, you can see that it's a lot more natural looking, a lot more subtle, a lot more detailed, smaller and detailed. So yeah, definitely that's how I got that done. All right, everybody, so now we are in Blender. I've already set up a lighting, yeah, just a world lighting system, whatever, and a camera. It's not a lighting tutorial, so we're just gonna cover the texturing of the mountain. I'll show you what good lighting does to it, of course, and it's important, like any other scene. But yeah, you guys can figure out your own lighting setup. So basically, we're gonna start first with adding a plane. We're gonna scale this plane up to, let's say, 1 by 1 kilometer. So it's 2 by 2 meters already. So we can do S and then 500. There we go. We want to make sure that our view distance in the viewport is actually set to higher than 1,000 meters, which is the basic view distance. This way we don't clip out in the viewport. Now we're gonna go and add some modify, or first subdivide, subdivide. You can just do it by 20. There you go. And then you can add a subdivision surface modifier. Then after that, a displace modifier. So turn the mid-level to 0 and then add a new texture. You can call it mountain or whichever mountain it is from the pack. So it's basically just like if you've bought the actual pack, it's all the same as this tutorial. So don't worry too much. So if you actually have the pack, you have all the different height maps. And then we're going to choose the height map. So you can use this with any of the different terrains I've given you guys, or if you've bought it, you guys can use. It's basically the same workflow with all the other terrains that are in the packs that you can buy. So you can just follow along with any terrain, but if you have the freebie, you can just see exactly what I have. So you'll notice right away that it looks a little messed up. First, we'll have to apply the scale because we've scaled it up, and you always want to make sure that your scale is just 1 on an object, otherwise you can have problems with scattering and that kind of stuff. So just make sure you apply the scale, and now you see that it's basically just a flat plane. That's because we need to use the UV coordinates, not local, and then click UV map. And of course we need to increase the strength. So we've already turned the mid-level to 0, so now we can just increase the strength. It's around 250 to get the normal, basically, yeah, height of this mountain. I've actually normalized the height maps and all the maps basically out of Gaea to get more detail. It basically clamps a mountain that, let's say a mountain's height map only reaches to a value of 0.5. By normalizing it, that 0.5 is turned into a 1. That's why if you import the OBJs, which I can show you right now, an OBJ, which is one of these ones. These are optimized adaptive subdivided meshes. So in this case, it's very small. So let me also scale it up by 1000. You can see that the height is messed up, right? And that's all because the height map's been normalized, and for some reason that has to then clamp every single thing that's exported like that. It's unfortunate, but it's very easy. Just, of course, make sure you apply rotation and scale when you've imported this, and then you can just go here in the dimensions, type 250 or 260. It basically looks good between these ranges. You can even have it all the way up to like 300 and it still look pretty decent, but 260 is basically 250, 260 is basically normal. And then you can just apply scale yet again, and boom, it's done, ready to use. Same for this one. Well, actually not same. This one doesn't suffer from this because we dictate the height with the display, so just keep it at 250 and you'll be fine. I'm going to shade it smooth, and now you can add some subdivisions. So a rule of thumb here is the 4K maps are good looking all the way, let's say to, I'd say 7 is the absolute max. It's unnecessary to go this high. Okay, 5 subdivisions is around 500,000. 6 subdivisions is 1.8 million. And now you can see it's 7 million vertices. You don't necessarily need this many vertices to make your height map look good at all. It's pretty much unnecessary detail. There is 8K mountains, but again, I'd say this amount of vertices is unnecessary unless you're gonna use actual PBR displacement, which you can do. But for our case, we can just keep the height map at around like 5 or 6 when we render. And while we're working on it, we can turn it to like 3. We also have the optimized mesh here, which retains the detail in all the detail-rich areas, and thereby kind of, yeah, it makes sure that you don't have an abundant amount of vertices for no reason. It's actually really nice because it's only 500,000 vertices, this mountain, yet you keep a lot of the detail. However, for texturing, it's often nicer to use a subdivided plane because in case texture painting becomes a little heavy on your machine, you can just turn down the subdivisions and still work with it. So we're going to use this subdivided plane mountain to actually texture, and then you can always just copy the texture onto these kinds of objects. Now, if you've bought the pack, you're already going to have a basic material set up for it, but in our case, we're going to start from scratch to totally go through it. So again, I'm going to use Quixel textures. I have a few Quixel textures that I really like, and they give me the best results, so we're just going to work with those. I'm using Node Wrangler, by the way, which can sometimes be a bit annoying, but Node Wrangler is an add-on you have in your base Blender build, so you can just quickly Control-Shift-T and then just add whole textures quickly. So basically we have this setup right here. We don't need the displacement on the second rock texture, so you can remove that. For the first rock texture, you can keep the displacement, but just move it all the way to the material output because we don't need it right here. Right now they're UV, they're just based on the UV. And the issue with that is, so you see a lot of like warping going over these vertical areas, and that's because the UV, of course, is, yeah, it's just a flat UV texture, and you can't really map well for, yeah, a mountain because it has all kinds of angles and shapes and whatever. So there's actually something called triplanar projection. In Blender, it's actually called box projection. This actually allows you to automatically project the texture differently based on how vertical the object is. So to do this in Blender, you can connect the object to the mapping, so the object texture coordinate, turn down the scale by a lot, so 0.01 is probably fine. And now we have to go to the textures and turn them into box and add a little bit of blend. This is going to get a little tedious. This is why I already set up this material for the people who bought the pack, because this is very tedious stuff and you have to do it for every single texture every time. So there you go. Now we've done that, and you can see that that warping that we saw, that dipping up and down, it's gone. Now the textures are projected nice and straight on these vertical areas, and then these areas, of course, we're not going to see the rock, but it's just texture or projected normally. It's all about this vertical area. The texture is projected straight, and that's also what we see in the reference is, you know, these straight layers, even though the mountain is sloped. Don't know why it's like that, again, but it's like that. So we're going to do the same for the second texture. So now we're going to actually add a little bit of grass as well and start mixing them all together using the first maps just to get a general idea of what's going on. Again, grass textures, you can use those free resources that I sent you guys to find a nice grass texture. So once we have our grass texture, you can delete the ambient occlusion and the displacement here, we don't need that. Just gonna put it down here. Now to be organized, let's just add some frames. So add a green box for the grass, and let's get to mixing. So we're just gonna add a mix shader real quick here and add the grass to it. And then we're gonna use our first map. It's called the rock map. You got it in your folder, the rock map. Just drag it in there and there you go. Use that to mask between the rock and the grass. We're also gonna turn the grass into a triplanar projected material. Again, make sure it's quite small and make sure it's all box projected. You'll have to do this basically for every texture. I just make you don't have to do it for like textures that are barely noticeable and they're not going to be on very vertical areas, but you know, just to be sure, you can just do it to every single texture. It's gonna just look better, and you're not gonna have any issues in the future. So there we go, we have the grass added. And now we can actually start working on our rock. So right now we only have one of the rocks added. We can mix the other one later, but I quickly want to just start adding some bump. So you'll be thinking, why is there displacement and bump? Trust me, just start layering these things up. We need extra bump. We need a lot of it. We were looking at this mountain from quite a distance away. So you really need to push out as much detail out of these PBR textures as you can. Problem, however, when you start pushing these bump maps, you get a lot of this problem, this glitchy ugliness. It's quite an easy fix, which is funny that it's fixed like this because it makes no sense in my head, but we're gonna basically dilute it. So we're gonna mix it with a color mix, RGB mix. So mix that, and then to mix it, we're just gonna add the details normal map that is also in your folder. So details normal, there you have it. Add a normal map node, connect these. We're going to connect this normal map to the B socket and basically dilute the bump a little bit. But now we can add a lot more. I don't know why, but it basically doing this stops it from clipping out. Just 0.3 is already enough, and you'll get the bump. You can see it's really, you see very like strong bump right here, yet it's not clipping. So what we did here is we increased the distance and the strength. Distance, well, I mean, strength does what it does, you know, how strong is this bump map, but distance is actually huge. So you can see right here, this is 1 and 35. So we're really increasing the overall length, or of the bump basically. So again, macro detail, we're looking at a mountain from pretty far away. If you're really close up, you want to be subtle and this and that, but when you're far away with these landscape texturing, you really want to crank this bump up, crank everything up. 35 gives you extremely nice details. You can even see it here on the left. Yeah, so I definitely recommend just cranking that sucker up, play around with it. But yeah, I'm just going to keep it on 35. And then the strength, also up to you. I put it quite high as well, but it's not 100% necessary. Just play around with it. So as you can see, it's really strong bump, but you can already start seeing that from a distance, it's already looking like there is a lot of rock detail in this mesh, even though it's actually only 28,000 polygons. So again, bump is your friend with landscape texturing. So we're gonna do the exact same for the other rock texture here. Just gonna add all this. So basically that's set up to now. So we want the texture to actually still be quite big. You could tile it a lot, but honestly, again, macro detail. We want to see cracks and crevices, but you don't have to think about the super tiny detail. If I scale this up by 5 times, see how we're just, you're losing a lot of detail there. Even though you're supposedly seeing more, you actually want it to be a little bigger, because we're looking at like big rock faces. So you want those big rocky, you know, outcrops to be noticeable. But yeah, the little noise and grumbliness, it's not necessary. So I'm keeping it at this scale, 0.01 for both of the rock textures. Now we're gonna start mixing between the two rock textures. I think the best way to do this is by going manual and then actually painting in where you want certain parts of the rock to be and where you don't want certain parts of the rock to be. So let's go and start painting. I have added free brushes down in the description that you can just download. I'm using these free brushes because yeah, they work for me. So yeah, make sure you download those and use those free brushes as I'll show you to texture paint where a certain rock will be. So to texture paint, we're gonna add an image texture. Click new, you can call this rock masking, and then make sure it's like 2K or something, so 2048. Okay, and there you go, you have made a new texture. Go into texture paint with that, and we're here. Now to get your brush, you can go to texture mask. I already have it loaded, but you can click new, and you click this little button right here, open. Again, in my case, I've already downloaded it, so I'm just gonna open it. So you can load in your brush and then make sure that the strength is set to 4 because the brush it's kind of dark. It's not like a true value of 1, and you really want to make sure that it mixes well. So just make sure the strength is set to 4 and make sure that mask mapping is set to random, so you get like a random rotation. My computer is already being slow, I can see, but we can go into the viewport shading to actually see how and where we want to brush in our second texture. Okay, so with our brush set to white, we can start it with texturing. So basically what we want to make sure with this painting is that we get rid of the tiling or like the obviousness that it's only one texture. So as you can see, because it's projected in a triplanar mode, you can actually see this white line of rock going all around, and you constantly see it showing up again. And we just want to make sure that this line is kind of broken up with different textures in between. So there we go. We're gonna just start painting in this second texture and get rid of the main texture and its tiling. So okay, so now that you're done, you want to make sure you click save images. If you don't, you're gonna lose whatever work you did the first time you changed the subdivision on the mesh or whatever. So make sure you click save all images, and then you can turn back to layout and see how it looks in the actual cycles renderer. There we go. Of course, I was looking at it. This is exactly with the sunlight, so I was like, where's the bump? Again, lighting is very important. If you're looking at something and it's just flatly lit, so meaning the light's right behind you, so it's just directly going onto an object, anything will look flat, even in real life. Cinematographers know this, you shouldn't just record something with the light directly hitting it unless it's like a face or something, but you want to have lighting from the sides to really shape it in 3D. And that's the same, of course, in 3D applications. We want good lighting, so hence I already set up lighting and a camera. That way I can, just show you what the texture actually looks like when you've done the work in your lighting. And there you go, you can see really nice rock textures. What is jarring though is the grass, and this is something that you've already seen me do in a previous video. We're gonna turn that grass specularity way down because again, the grass roughness on a texture doesn't actually reflect how rough it would be if there's actual 3D grass, scattering the light around and absorbing it. So turning down the specularity actually makes sure less of the light bounces into our eyes. Grass is very rough, it absorbs light more rather than reflect it straight into our eyes. So hence we can turn down the specularity to basically 0. But yeah, so let's start working on the grass. The grass right now looks pretty similar. It's just a tiled grass texture not that interesting. First thing we can do is add some extra detail using a noise node. We can use a color ramp, some dark green, and then we're going to use that multiply. Just want a little bit of a darker green patch going on. Okay, this is way too much. Okay, I know it looks a little extreme right now, but we can play around with it. So we're going to copy this mix node right here, then turn it to mix, just add it. And now we're going to use the color texture, color map, whatever it is. So here, final color, there we go. And we can just add it into the mix on the B slot right here. All right, so we've added the final color map here to mix with the grass. So we're only looking at the grass node, by the way, right now, not the rock. That's why the rock's disappeared. Now we can just start adding. As you can see, if you just added the Gaea texture, this is what you'll get. Not very convincing. So what we do instead is we just mix it a little bit with the grass to get that darkness on the convexes and that kind of stuff, and get the noisiness down here. And you can see that the very strong noise that we added before it is also dampened a little bit. And this way we just kill the tiling in the texture, and you can really see some nice detail coming through. And then when we add the main texture again, there you go. Now I know you can get a lot of pixel problems when we use these maps, and we're a little closer, and that's why I've made a nice little blur node for you guys, so you can actually blur stuff out in Blender now. But it's basically a material node or a node group that you can append. So basically you click on the blend file, then you go to append it, of course, and then you go node tree, blur. And using this, we can, well, just add blur. There it is, blur. It's a really simple node that you can add. Make sure that it has actual mapping, so texture coordinates and that kind of stuff added to it. So what we need right here is a texture coordinate, UV mapping, and just make sure that's in the vector because it needs it. And once that's done, we can now add that to any image and blur it out. Now, I don't know if I want to add it to the final color map for me. You could do it, and that way you can kind of hide the pixelation. It's quite strong, but yeah, you can blur it out quite a bit. You can blur out to where it mixes the grass and the rock. That's also a possibility. You can do all kinds of stuff. So the grass is looking kind of boring. It's very flat. There's not much going on. We're gonna add some extra bump to it, but there's definitely some extra work that needs to be done. So let's see, something like this. It's quite a strong bump already, as you can see. And this is because I have a nice texture for it, but yeah, there needs to be some extra layering here. So we're gonna actually add another bump and use noise to get more of the clumpy bump. That's starting to sound real stupid, but if we look at this beautiful photo right here, you see how there's like a lot of bumpiness in these clumps of grass. Now, I didn't feel like scattering grass all over my mountain because it's a distant asset. In this case, I would like to actually just have a texture that kind of shows it. And look, if you have a lot of video compression and all that kind of stuff going on, some atmospheric haze and all that, your bump node can easily kind of replicate what the real foliage would look like. So we're gonna add a noise bump, and then we're gonna scale this noise way up. We don't have to add any detail because it's just on the clumps and that kind of stuff. But there you go, you already have a bunch of it, and it might even be a little too strong. And that way you just kind of get a clumpy bump in the grass. That really gives it a nice 3D look to it. And we're just gonna quickly move on to the sediment. File again and grab all sediment combined map and add that. And there we go. Now you can see where our sediment will be. And then add a bump node and connect the displacement there. There you go. With distance, we just add that really nice, 3D lookingness to the bump. We're actually gonna scale it down. By scaling it up, it scales it down. So the higher your number is, the more scaled down the texture is. 0.3 is something I like. Yeah, that looks good. Multiply it by a little bit. I don't know, it's quite strong right now. It depends on what you want, but we can use a math node and then multiply it by 0.5 to kind of dampen the effect, because it's a pretty strong effect, and depending on how close you are to the mountain, I don't think it's that necessary to have such a strong sediment flow. It looks quite unrealistic when it's very, very strong. Plus, I'm going to show you guys some other ways in Blender how to create flow lines and all that that are very easily interchanged and that kind of stuff, so you have more control in Blender texturing it rather than just the mask you've rendered out of Gaea. And okay, so lastly, we're gonna add a snow map. Just gonna see if it's already in here. Probably is. There we go. So again, the snow map, you also have it in that file folder. Basically here we can map out where our snow is. Well, for snow you could use a PBR material, but for now I'm just going to use just a principled texture that's set to white, that has subsurface. Yeah, and then in this case also maybe add a little bit of noise. 0.6 roughness, so get really fine noise in your snow. There you go, you have a very nice mountain asset already. Very strong asset, but I'm going to show you guys how to really get into the nooks and crannies and actually pull out all the detail with your snow, and or get sediment in the nooks and crannies using the textures and all that. I could also increase the displacement a little bit, just add another little node there so I can get this line out of the way. You can actually just make a mix RGB again, turn down the subdivisions because it's slowing everything down. So mix RGB, we're gonna mix it just like the rock and grass has been mixed, and then also use this rock map. Oh, that's actually the rock masking. Here's the rock and grass, so it's called the rock map. Just take that, just bring it over, and then we're gonna just add that in, add a displacement with a height of 1, scale 1, everything 1, there we go, and just add that in the B socket. Let's see if I did this correctly. Yeah, so right now the displacement of the rock is actually just only affecting the rock, and then because we added an empty displacement with just a height of 1, you can even make it like way higher, you're actually adding this kind of 3D effect on the grass that's laying on top of this rock. So it actually looks like the grass is not just a flat transition from grass texture to rock texture, but what happens when I add a displacement with the height of 1 or 2, I'm basically just telling that the grass is a little bit higher, so when that edge is of the two textures meeting each other, you're going to have a little bit of a bump that you can see right here, a little bit of a bump going in, and that will make it look like the grass is actually a little soil on top of a rocky underlay, as it were. So you can get some nice ambient occlusion or like little darkness around the edges. Now, again, this is a small detail. I think 2 might be a little bit too much. You can really see it here, how there's a shadow. It's very pixelated, but there's a shadow there. If you have AK textures, you can really see how much shadow that is. 2, 1.5, I think 1.5 is nice. And from a distance, so from this far away, you'll notice a little shadow where the grass meets the rock, which will really make it look like this grass layer is like 3D and it's laying on top of this rock. So there you go. Yeah, we're basically in the last part now, where I'll show you like a way of doing it in Blender where you get like data of cavities and cracks and all that kind of stuff, like very detailed data on your mesh that you can then turn into really nice details in your texture. So for this extra detail, we'll actually have to start going into the sculpting mode and make a cavity map there. But sadly, that doesn't work when you have a subdivided plane, because it will just work with this unsubdivided plane. I think maybe with multi-res it will work, but I just take the lot object that I have and just use it. Then I go into sculpting and then make sure that, yeah, here's my lot object. So this is just the OBJ, the mesh that is optimized and everything, that has the shape. We scroll down to this paint thing over here, down in the scope mode. We scroll down, you find paint, we click on that, we open the tool, and then in the brush settings you go to advanced and then select cavity. And once we've done that, you can click a factor of maybe 1 blur. I don't want to add any blur, I don't think. Or we can add a little blur, let's see. Yeah, okay, so factor 0.5 or 1 and then blur 1. And there we go, we can start painting in cavities in Blender. So just covering this whole mesh with my brush multiple times. There you go. So I have just successfully masked out the cavities. Then we can click create mask, and that will add a color attribute to our mesh here. So what we're gonna do, guys, is take this color attribute that we have added to a diffuse, and then we're gonna bake that out into an actual image texture that we can then use on this subdivided plane. Again, if you're using this optimized OBJ model, you can just use the color attribute in your texture. However, to port over the cavities from your object to the subdivided plane, we'll actually have to bake it out into a texture and then use that texture onto the subdivided plane. It's a little annoying, but it's just a workaround because I normally just use these optimized meshes to texture and stuff rather than a subdivided plane, but I'm showing you guys this. So pretty much what we have to do is just connect it to a diffuse, then we go to the bake section, and make sure you open another tab here with your with the UV editor open. Just make sure it's open right here, otherwise it won't work for some reason, at least in my case. So go to the bake, make sure bake type diffuse, above surface, make sure you unclick or unselect direct and indirect. We only want the color. Then we go to output, image texture, clear image, adjacent faces, and make sure that the size is 0 pixel margin. Then we create an image. So again, just like any other image texture we've created, you make a new one and you just create one, name it whatever. Select this node, so just make sure it's selected, and then we click bake while the diffuse is actually, you know, plugged into the surface. We click bake and then it will show up right here. And now we can click save as, and then save it as your cavity map right here. And then we can use it in texturing this object. So everybody, now that we've baked the cavity map from the other mountain, we're gonna apply it to this mountain with our displace. Yeah, with our displace modifier, so the subdivided plane. What we're gonna basically do is this snow map. It can also be used for gravel and sediment, but in our case, we wanted a snowy mountain, so we'll make it snow. But we want to add a little bit more snow, and we want to add snow in the cracks and crevices, and also in more of the cavities and stuff of the mountain. So hence we have this more workable solution, which gives you a bit more control over everything in the texture. So we're actually first going to bring in a separate X, Y, and Z. We are going to connect the normal texture coordinate into the mapping, and you'll see this go pop up. Basically, this will turn the normal data of all the PBR textures into data separating the top and the bottom of the object, and of course the normal data will give you these fake bottom info and fake top info and that kind of stuff. So we're going to use a color ramp. You can also use mapping range, but I like color ramp to just really get precise. I'm going to use constant, and then just there we go, something like this is fine. Now if we add this with a mix RGB, set to add and then factor to 1, and then we add this to the B slot, we're gonna have a mountain that's basically completely covered in snow, which is unnecessary. We want to mask out this normal based mask with like a height based mask, so we can do that very easily by copying and pasting the same XYZ setup and then putting in the object texture coordinate, then making sure that we have a map range. Oh, so the Z, we're gonna connect the Z to the value of the map range, and then from min 0, max 250, or whatever your strength is on your displace modifier, this will actually normalize the data. Otherwise you're gonna just have, well, very messed up data. This map range will bring it back to usable levels. Using a color ramp, we can then make a height selection really easily. And then, for example, you could just mix RGB and connect that. And you'd get something like, oh, we're gonna use multiply, there you go. And connect that, and then you have something like this, which sadly has a very obvious line showing where the height selection is placed. So now we're gonna play around with the cavity and warping this line. So to warp this height line, we can add a vector math before we add all this, and add a noise texture. Let's check it out. Okay, looking good. I'm gonna add this noise texture with a vector math set to multiply, and then we can actually turn this to a constant. That'd be better. And there you can see we've just displaced this height selection, and that gives us a lot more interesting results. I'm gonna change the noise around a bit, add some detail and all that, maybe some roughness, 0.6. So yeah, that will look a lot more interesting. Now, this is interesting for sure. Could work for you. However, I don't find it very realistic how the snow would flow down on these convexes. So I actually want to limit the bottom parts to only be in the cavity, which is why we have said cavity map to work with. So now I'm gonna have to add the cavity image texture. I already added it into my project, but you guys can load it in. Just your cavity map right here. I'm gonna invert it because I want the white to be in the actual concaves, the cavities. I'm gonna clamp it a bit with a color ramp. So we're gonna clamp it with a color ramp. Just make the blacks a bit stronger. I want it to be a bit sharper. I'm gonna add another color ramp here. But it's going to be the peak selection, because the peak one, I want the peak to stay completely white. Because if we just plug in this cavity map, we can see what happens right there. If we just plug in this cavity map, yeah, it's just going to look weird. I want the peak to be all white, and right now, yeah, it's just not working out for us. So first we're going to use another mix RGB to add the height selection. So just the pure height selection can actually be a bit less high, and then add the cavity map together. That way we get something like this. As you can see, the cavity map and the height selection have been added together. Seems like the height selection is not that white. There we go. Just turned the value up to 4 on the white there, so it's actually quite strong. We could even add a little bit more noise. Let's see. Because this will be our mask right now. This will be our complete mask. However, now that we've added this, we can see another line still, even if it's faded, another line. So we want to avoid that. So I'm just going to add another vector math node. Pretty much we just copy whatever we did here. But I want this to be a little different, so let's see. So I want our main snow to stop here basically, and then let's connect, or let's turn this up even more, 7. So that's really okay. There we go. And then we have this mask for the total snow line, basically the complete snow line. So we'll have to use another mix RGB. That is the mix RGB, I'm being dumb. So another mix RGB, and now we can use multiply. There we go. And now we've basically added a very dynamic edge, and the cavity is actually the last part, so that looks good. And then at the end we're gonna multiply, connect this to the B socket again. There we go. So basically now we have this, and then we're gonna multiply this normal based mask as well. And there we are, cutting out more detail, and then add our normal snow map back. And then if you check the final shader, we have something like this. It's pretty interesting looking. However, I think I made the normals, I gave them a little too much wiggle, or a little too much snow in the cracks. A little less would be fine. And I think I can also allow the this is just to really sharpen everything. I'm gonna, no, that's fine. A little lower maybe. No, higher. I'm actually gonna lower the whole mask. So I'm taking this noise selection and I'm gonna lower it a little bit. I think there should be a little bit more rundown of the cavity. Not that much, but a little bit more. Something like this could be pretty good looking. It's not perfect. I play around with these values for like a few hours normally, but I have to like show you guys how to do these things and do them effectively. But there we go, something like this. So you can really see how that snow now has all this detail and the cracks and crevices and tops and bottoms, whatever. The little cavities all over the place and that kind of stuff, which is really nice. We can also play around with the seed here and give this noise a seed, and that way we have a lot more customizability. You can just endless seeds of how the snow is gonna look as it runs down. You can turn up the scale, turn down the scale. Everything's possible basically with this method, and it gives you a lot more control over how your snow looks on the mountain, which I like. It is a bit of extra work, especially with that cavity map baking and all that. Okay, let's hope that it actually survives this. So we just subdivided it a bunch and we have a lot more detail, and due to that the texture changed a bit, but that's all fine. It really changed, so that's actually really nice as well, where it changes with actual, you know, how your mountain's actually all together. You can just add a little bit more snow perhaps. So this would be the mountain with a little bit more snow on top, etc. And again, you can use this as a sediment map too. Take this Princeton BDSF with the sediment and just attach that directly. See what happens. And there you go. This could be like a mountain with a bunch of rock slides, and you know, the rocks are just coming down. Except for I would definitely get rid of the height based. So I would get rid of this right here, because, you know, just having a height based thing makes no sense. So I'd rather just use the cavity. Okay, there we go. So we're gonna just bypass the height selection. As you can see, there we go. That looks a lot better. So if you're using sediment, I would bypass the height selection, because of course, unlike ice and snow on a mountain, that high up in the mountain, it, you know, all collects on the peak, sediment or like gravel is not gonna collect like that on the peaks of a mountain. So you can just ignore that and just use the cavity map mixed together with, of course, the warping noise and the normal, and then you can get really nice gravelly sediment onto your mountain as well. So yeah, this is just basically a node layout to get like a nice peak detail in your rock, and I hope that's helpful. It's pretty much covering most of it. We painted in custom like masking for the rocks or like the cliff. You could do the same, adding little landslides or, you know, little rock slides, that kind of stuff, or maybe some mud pool or whatever. Just whatever detail you want to add. All you have to do is add a PBR material, make sure it's triplanar projected, and then just make a little image mask and start painting away onto your mesh. You can do all kinds of stuff. It's very customizable. Texturing in this program allows you to have a lot more freedom with how your mountain is going to look. You can make it snowy, you can make it gravelly, you can make it both. yeah, you could copy this group of textures, this cluster of textures, and use it for both the sediment and the snow, and like give it different values, and that way you get like a look of maybe snow, gravel, and then grass. It's all kinds of possibilities here. Any more detail you would want to add here is up to you. It's all customizable. And also scattering. You want to scatter like trees, bushes, rocks, and rock slides and all that. And you can do that using various maps, or you can use it using the manual scatter that GeoScatter has to offer. But pretty much this is a good result right here. I'm gonna ask you guys to render it out with some cool lighting, maybe some atmosphere, and yeah, there you go. A nice realistic mountain texture done quite quickly in Blender with a few maps that you can also create, or you can just buy the mountain pack and support my channel and support my tutorials. It's all up to you. I hope this was very helpful, and of course I'm willing to answer any questions and stuff, but I also ask you guys to play around yourself. I mean, I found most of this stuff out, you know, just playing around with nodes and textures, and yeah, really trying to figure stuff out just for fun. And then you find out things that you can use in future projects forever. So yeah, I definitely recommend you guys playing around with that and doing that. But I also hope that this tutorial sheds some light on how I get like really nice rock detail, etc. on my mountains. And also look at this grass, it looks really nice and fluffy. You see the displace that we put on the grass that kind of adds a little shadow over this rock right here, adding a little bit of a shadow, making it look like it's some 3D grass on top of this rock. You can, yeah, it looks really nice. Again, it's a lot of detail. If I render this out in 4K, actually, I think it would look pretty amazing. That's pretty much it for this tutorial. Hope you enjoyed.
Is it cold when you're dreaming? Is it cold when you're under? I wanna roll